Hi there, and welcome to this workshop on sharing know-how for digital transformation. I'm hoping that you can all hear me and see the screen here. It looks like currently we have about 12 of you joining us, which is great, thanks. If you wouldn't mind staying muted for the moment, we have a relatively short presentation with some questions at the end, actually, for you, and we'll obviously be very interested in your thoughts and opinions. If you can add them to the chat or put your hand up at the end, and then we will have a moderated discussion at the end. We're aiming for about 15 minutes or so of discussion. So I think we should probably get started. One or two more people joining us, and somebody has put something in the chat already. Sound and vision okay. Thank you, Jonathan. Great. So this workshop is about knowledge rather than data, and particularly that subtype of knowledge we call know-how, and how it can be used to support digital transformation. We brought together two projects. First, a project that we led for Health Data Research UK and the Better Care Knowledge Management Workstream. We'll talk about that in a moment. But also, we're delighted to welcome Kathrin and Robin from Edinburgh University, who led on a project evaluating the NHS Global Digital Exemplar Programme, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, exploring, again, digital transformation and knowledge transfer. So I've mentioned that we're talking about and interested in know-how for this workshop. What do we mean by know-how? Well, it's one of several different kinds of knowledge. Knowledge I define as information which is generic across individuals. Know-how is information that enables people to work smarter or faster. So it's insight, skills, often quite intuitive, very difficult to verbalize. Sometimes it's just little hints and tips about how to get your work done faster or smarter. And the project that we looked at know-how in was to do with Health Data Research UK's Better Care programme. And that's about using health data to improve care through continuous improvement loops. So learning health systems, if you like. And we were asked to engage with that Better Care programme, and it has about 18 or 20 different sites across the UK, and over 100 people are involved. And we were asking questions about know-how within those sites and people's work. Firstly, starting with what know-how is being sought by people, and what know-how are they sharing? And then what did they find was helping or hindering that sharing process? And then finally, HDRUK provide a number of knowledge sharing tools, and we were interested in knowing which ones of those we used and how they could be improved. So I'll hand over to Lindsay Turner now from the Faculty of Clinical Informatics to present you with the results of that project. Lindsay.
Thank you, Jeremy. So I will summarise the results of a survey and a series of interviews that we conducted with Better Care staff. We had an initial survey, and then we used the results of that survey to inform the interviews, asking questions related to the themes that Jeremy described. So starting with this diagram, which shows the opposing forces that we identified that either enable sharing of know-how or acted as barriers against that in the orange on the right-hand side. And this considers both learning from others and sharing with others. So starting on the top with the first green arrow, it was felt that senior colleagues had an important role to play in helping their more junior colleagues, other members of their team, to access know-how. Senior members would have better awareness of who they could learn from and who they should be sharing with. It was also felt that mindset was very important for sharing and learning, which is in opposition to the top barrier on the right-hand side, where having a lack of bandwidth was a problem. So in a large national programme like Better Care, having a facilitator role was valued. So that's the people arrow there. So someone that could recognise relevant links between different projects in the vast programme and put people in touch with each other where they felt that appropriate learning and sharing would be beneficial to both parties. The next one down is peer endorsement. and being encouraged to learn or share by a peer, especially one who had some example of their own success from sharing know-how. That was felt to be something that could be of benefit, and this is opposed by I wanted to highlight that one kind of goes opposite people who aren't interested. So people who lack interest on the barrier side, if people didn't have interest, they just weren't going to share. But if anything was going to encourage them to share, it was thought that could be someone, a peer recommending it. So having multiple channels was also deemed to be important, rather than sort of focusing all attention on one single method of sharing in order to suit all preferences. And a couple of other barriers I haven't mentioned yet. So the second row down is about fragmentation, where information was spread across multiple systems and everyone was working differently. And at the bottom as well, culture. So if culture discourages sharing, and this was identified as sometimes being an issue in academia, and that might be due to competition for publication or for funding. And obviously this would be a major barrier for sharing know-how. So moving on to the next slide now. Could you move us on, Jeremy? Thank you. So these are various ways of working that were felt to be able to promote knowledge sharing. So that started, initially having the right attitudes, such as an innovation culture where people are encouraged to have their own personal development. Also, there was a series of techniques, practical techniques that were mentioned that could help teams to embed sharing in their everyday ways of working. So that's things like after action reviews or appreciative inquiry exercises. And these are all described in a series of e-learning modules by Health Education England, their Knowledge and Library Services department. So you can find those all online if you're interested. Also, having the right people involved was felt to be important. So the idea of avoiding echo chambers, that actually came up on separate occasions by different people we interviewed. So that was referring to the need to actively seek out new ideas and different views to promote increased learning and sharing. And then if we click through, if you can go ahead, Jeremy.
I'm trying, it's just a bit slow. Got it.
There we go, thank you. So these are some specific initiatives that were mentioned that could promote sharing. So that included a forum for people in the network on themes of particular interest to them. Also workshops and events. So the Better Care programme have regular insight days, which brings together everyone in the network. And those were really valued by all the participants and felt to be of great interest to them and great value. Also, if there was a way of being able to share, to be able to search the interests and expertise of people involved in the programme. So that's the biographies mentioned there, and making it searchable, that would be a way of identifying who to share with or who to learn from, which could sometimes be difficult to find out, even if you have the intention of wanting to do that. Okay, next slide.
I'm trying. Page down, maybe. Oh, there we go.
Okay, thank you. So with the survey and the interviews being conducted during the pandemic, the impact of COVID on people's ability to share and learn know-how was obviously a big theme within our results. Interestingly, there were more positive impacts identified than the negative ones. So some of the positive things people talked about were barriers being removed, giving them better access to information and allowing new ways of working. But one of the negative impacts that was mentioned quite a lot was the difficulty of having those kind of casual, informal, unplanned, chance conversations where you'd usually bump into someone in a corridor over a water cooler, and that it was very difficult to replicate that in the new ways of working. And then if it'll let you go down. So in conclusion, a key role that was felt to be of great value to encourage sharing was that of a facilitator, someone who had oversight of all the work going on in the programme with all the numerous projects going on, and some key drivers for enabling sharing to improve in a sustainable way for this sharing culture to be embedded were making a conscious effort to build that sharing culture, for senior staff to support juniors, for leaders to set an example where sharing is the normal way of working, and also to make sharing easy and accessible by having the right tools available, but also seeking to continually get feedback on those tools and seek to improve them. So I'll hand back to you, Jeremy, before we move on.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Lindsay. I think we'll try and leave questions and discussion to the end, unless there's something absolutely burning. And let's move on to the Edinburgh Project, the GDE exemplar evaluation.
Excellent, thank you. Can you click? I think there's unfortunately some animation in this slide. Sorry, it's only this one.
It seems to be working now.
Excellent. No, that's it.
Too far.
So I'm going to talk about something completely different, but you'll be seeing some parallels, which is quite interesting. So we're just finishing the Global Digital Exemplar evaluation. So watch out, our final report is out soon. We looked at 36 organizations, and we looked at these kind of three strands: digital transformation within providers, and then how knowledge spread between those providers through formal mechanisms such as blueprints and GDE fast follower relationships. And then as a third strand, we looked at how GDE has actually helped to create a national learning ecosystem to spread this kind of knowledge and know-how. Next slide, please. So this is kind of, so we looked at what are the most effective ways to share knowledge. So we know it's complex, yeah, it takes a lot of work. There's no recipe for success, so that's the bad news, I suppose. But we found that the key factor throughout was the growth of informal knowledge networking. And that was kind of fueled by mutual benefits of knowledge sharing. So, and these kind of conditions to promote knowledge sharing were promoted through certain bits that had to be in place. And we found, for example, geographical proximity was helpful, having a common technological platform was helpful, and institutional and cultural alignment. So we're talking, for example, GDE fast follower relationship, but also out with the GDE program. So those were the formal ones, but then we also saw that there were lots of informal networking events and activities taking place, and they were often most successful when they were linked to professional agendas, and they were also often more effective than the formally initiated mechanisms, although they could be stimulated by formal mechanisms. So think, for example, blueprints. We found that they actually worked as a networking tool to establish contact, and then people tended to visit each other to share that knowledge in more detail and embody it. And then we also found that these tools were often used in unanticipated ways, such as I said, the blueprints were used as a networking tool and not actually primarily as what they were initially intended. So they evolved over time. Next slide, please. So I suppose what you're most interested in now is what can leaders do to promote knowledge sharing? And the problem there is that actually top-down plans are not actually very effective at identifying specific areas where informal knowledge networking will and know-how sharing will take off. So they're very difficult to plan in advance. You kind of have to go with it as you go along and see what happens. And that's because knowledge exchange is driven by mutual benefits of various parties. So, for example, solving a common problem, enhancing status. So the only thing that leaders can do to promote knowledge sharing channels and mechanisms that emerge organically, and then focus on these areas that seem to work, but they can change over time. So there's no kind of recipe for success, unfortunately. Next slide, please. So that's the last slide. So we need to realize that knowledge transfer and takes time and effort. It's not easy, and especially in a health service that has other things to do and to focus on. That is a priority. Providing care is a priority. That's it. We're firefighting a lot of the time, especially now with COVID. So there's support needed to sustain knowledge sharing in the medium and long term. That's key going forward. And that's especially the case when there's an uneven distribution of expertise, such as, for example, some people who know something that everybody wants to know, that it's a full-time job for them to share the knowledge. Central support needs to be flexible and focus on identifying ways of sharing that work, and then strategically support these. That's it. Great, we have some questions.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Kathrin and Lindsay. And it's fascinating to see the similarities and also some differences in the insights that these two very different projects on two very different kinds of communities generated. And actually the method for conducting the research was also not identical, and they both use qualitative, I think, and quantitative methods. So we had identified 3 specific questions for discussion, but perhaps before we go on to those, we could look at the chat. And I see that Jonathan, you have a question. Would you like to unmute and ask that?
Yeah, thank you. So it really applies to both, but I first asked on GDE evaluation. Is there a problem that we're asking people about systems for which they don't have a very good language for sharing the discussion? That is, functions, systems, benefits. Is this area immature in that sense, so that you have to work in that rather than just asking them in the way that you would in a mature subject?
Maybe shall I just kick off, and then Robin has probably something to add. Yes, I think so. I mean, that's always the problem, isn't it? Especially with interdisciplinary communication, and you need a lot of people to agree on something in digital transformation. So yes, I think there was a problem with different definitions. We didn't look at it in specifically, but from what we found, personal kind of informal networking, you know, going out to the pub, visiting sites, that's usually when you identify that there isn't a common language, and that's when it gets solved, or site visits or something like that, some kind of interpersonal relationships.
But I think, Kathrin, what we saw was that within the health service, you saw peer-to-peer exchanges with people who had implemented a system, having a lot of common understanding of the concerns of people who are about to implement a system. I think the issues where differences of perspective became more salient was in bridging between the kind of local benefits of a system and, for example, how a system might fulfill national NHS targets like cost saving or big indicators. So there was a difficulty relating local benefits to global benefits. And I think that raises the more general issue that Kathrin's also flagged on, which is the asymmetry of people's positions. People have different things at stake and different concerns. And where there's an alignment of concerns, then you find this organic information sharing emerging because people find it useful to share information. And the difficulties are more intense where players are less aligned.
Yeah, thanks. If I can have a supplementary on that, which connects quite closely to Robert, I think almost said there. My secondary question was about professional demarcation. So part of peer-to-peer, finding your opposite number, is the professional demarcation becomes irrelevant because you find them when you talk to them. But we need that language, or we need systems that work across traditional professional demarcations. What did you find in the 2 studies about that?
Who'd like to take that up? Lindsay, I see you're unmuted. Can you got a thought about professional demarcation?
It's just one thing that came to mind, which came through in our study, was that confidence to share was a major thing. So a lot of the time when I was interviewing people, they sort of sometimes if I was interviewing someone who was maybe like a researcher analyst level, if they didn't always have the confidence to feel that they had something worthy of sharing. So I don't know if that's relevant to this question in terms of professional kind of boundaries and things, but they didn't feel like, when I asked them, have you shared anything, they'd sort of say, oh, not yet, or I haven't got anything worthy of sharing. It was kind of the feeling. So there's a need for people to have the confidence to share with others, and maybe that comes down to sort of their either their professional area or their kind of level of experience.
Robin, do I detect you've got a comment? Thanks, Lindsay.
No, I don't know.
How about Kathrin?
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of alluded to that a little bit. That I think that's the key problem, that we don't have that kind of knowledge exchange between different demarcations, because it works very well within, for example, pharmacists who've really driven the EPMA agenda forward. Yeah, so that's something we should be looking into, I think.
If I could just come in very briefly here, I've been working with the NHS XAI lab for a few months now, and it's fascinating to see the different language that's used by people from different professional backgrounds around, for example, development and validation of tools using machine learning methods. And I think there are some genuine barriers there, and we're working on a glossary project as a result of that. So thanks for raising that, Jonathan. We've got a couple of other comments here. First of all, from Lou Wilson. Well, Lou, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, yes, thank you. Great presentations, really, really interesting. Thank you very much. Probably building on what Lindsay was saying, did you notice any other trends or preferences depending on role type or seniority around preferences for sharing know-how?
Thanks, Lou. Lindsay.
I'll start with that.
Yep.
I don't think we necessarily looked at the combination of people's their role type and the seniority linked to their preference. Just more generally, though, the preferences, it was seen that everyone has different preferences for their way of sharing, and that this is perhaps just quite unique to them, and that's why one of the comments came up in my slides there about needing to have multiple channels. Some people said, I'm an email person, I do everything by email, and other people would say, don't bother sending me an email, pick up the phone. So I don't know that it's necessarily down to role type or seniority, or that's not something we specifically looked into. I think it might just be down to individual preferences, but as I say, nothing we formally studied.
Oh, that's really interesting, thank you. I guess one of the things behind my question was a bit of age and stage thing. My kids are a bit more grown up now, and it's much easier to get to the pub at 6 o'clock than it was for many years when I was doing bath time. So, coffee culture and cafe culture was much more important at that time. So maybe it's more of an age and stage thing than seniority.
Well, I think maybe just to add, in related innovation research work, we found that innovation works better in flat structures. So, so if you have a hierarchical structure where people can't speak up, then I assume knowledge sharing and innovation is inhibited.
Great, thanks. And there's a link here with the next question from Biliana. Would you like to ask your questions about culture?
Yeah, just wanted to add, which was just said about the structure, really structure language channels. All this somehow comes to the way we built the culture, whether it's a micro culture or very much big culture in NHS and across the NHS. But the truth is that we talk about culture very much at the end of our projects, and even on some of the slides I can notice the culture comes at the bottom, but actually this is the drive. And if we start educating, and I was really curious throughout this research, have you noticed, or did you come across to any a level of understanding of what culture of innovation is? Because this is very much comes with the attributes like learning, sharing, reflecting, etc.
Rob, could we bring you in there?
Do you mean Robin?
Robin, sorry, yeah.
Apologies. It's very interesting. Yeah, culture is the kind of this all singing, all dancing thing that's like the water we swim in, and then you notice it when it cuts against what your plans are. And so what we found in the health service, normally there's a kind of a positive culture, and health service organisations are very keen to collaborate with their peers. And they're particularly keen to collaborate with their local peers, hospitals and provider organisations in the same area. But then every now and then you found areas where the local culture didn't work, maybe because there'd been a conflict for status between adjacent trusts, or some cases there was a small trust didn't feel it was being asked to kowtow to a bigger one. So suddenly the thing that had been a win-win game across the NHS and altruism across the NHS, you suddenly saw conflict and opportunistic behaviour turn up. So that related then to particular history and interaction and broader circumstances, NHS policy, where there was mergers. If you might find a small trust being taken over by a large trust, then collaboration could actually threaten your autonomy as a small trust. So there are some things that can undermine that broader, otherwise largely supportive culture.
That's great. Thanks, Robin, and apologies for getting your name wrong. I wonder if we should perhaps just quickly move back to that. We did identify these 3 questions, and I'll just share my screen again, although it may not necessarily end up in the right place. Yeah, here are the questions coming. Right, that's them. I don't think we've got time to do this, but I think it's the interesting questions to think about. How do we personally share our know-how? What support might help us to learn and share more? And it's always good to have some great examples of successful sharing when you're trying to encourage people to share their know-how. But I'd just like to end, thanks for all your participation on this. I'd just like to end with Lindsay. There's a small plug for the Faculty of Clinical Informatics. Lindsay.
Thank you. Yes, as Jeremy mentioned, we did this work as part of our role within the Faculty of Clinical Informatics. And if you have any interest in clinical informatics and are looking for that kind of professional body to support you and your interests, we are currently open for applications for membership, but only until Monday. So do look at our website and contact us if you would like to hear more at all. Thanks, Lindsay. And I'd like to thank Kathrin, Robin and Lindsay for your participation in this workshop, and of course you as participants with your comments and questions. I hope we'll do some more in this space around know-how and sharing, but I think we're probably going back to the main section, conference now, if my clock is right. So thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.